Excuse me, sir. I think I know what's wrong with your system.
Grant Whitmore laughed.
The Maid's kid wants to play engineer?
He looked her up and down. Wrinkled uniform, scuffed sneakers.
Sure, sweetheart. Fix this. Fix it and you get $700 million.
The room exploded with laughter. Then his face went cold.
Now get your filthy hands off my floor before you contaminate something your mother couldn't afford in a lifetime! Security, remove this trash!
Someone pulled out a phone, recording. Not one person defended her. 20 adults watched a man destroy a 16-year-old girl, and nobody moved. But none of them could imagine what was coming. In 90 seconds, she would do exactly what he asked, and the man who called her trash would be begging her to stay. To understand what happened that afternoon, you need to see the building first. Meridian Systems sits on a 12-acre campus in North Austin, Texas. 40 floors of mirrored glass, a lobby that smells like fresh orchids and new money, and a parking garage full of cars that cost more than most people's houses. The company builds enterprise software. Their flagship product, a platform called Meridian Nexus, handles encrypted data processing for some of the biggest corporations on Earth. Banks, defense contractors, hospital networks. If Nexus goes down, people notice. And 3 days before Chloe Bennett walked through that lobby with a brown paper bag, Nexus went down hard. The crash started on a Tuesday morning at 6:15. Every node in the Nexus cluster failed within 90 seconds of each other. By the time the engineering team arrived at 8, the entire platform was offline. Client dashboards showed nothing but red. Phone lines lit up like Christmas. Zenith Corporation, Meridian's largest client, called within the hour. Their chief operating officer didn't yell. He spoke very quietly, which was worse. You have 48 hours to restore full service. If you can't, we're pulling the contract. That contract was worth $700 million. Grant Whitmore heard the number and felt his chest tighten. He'd built Meridian from a 3-person startup in a garage in Round Rock. 22 years of 16-hour days. He'd taken the company public, survived 2 recessions, and turned down 3 acquisition offers because he believed Meridian was worth more than anyone was willing to pay. And now, his entire legacy was hanging on a system that nobody in his building could fix. Grant was 52 years old, 6'1", and had the kind of jaw that looked like it had been designed by a committee of people who wanted to sell watches. He wore a $6,000 suit that morning, a Patek Philippe on his left wrist, and the expression of a man who had not slept in 3 days. He stood in the conference room on the 38th floor and stared at his lead engineer, Nathan Carver. "I hired 20 of you," Grant said. His voice was low, controlled, and somehow more frightening than shouting. 20 engineers. Every one of you came to me with a degree from somewhere impressive and a resume full of words I can barely pronounce. And not a single one of you can tell me why a system I spent 3 years building just decided to die. Nathan Carver was 38, talented and terrified. He had been staring at the same error logs for 72 hours. His eyes were bloodshot. His coffee had gone cold 6 hours ago, and no one had replaced it. "Sir, we've isolated it to the encryption module, but the root cause is that I'm surrounded by people who can find problems but can't fix them." Grant turned to the window. Downtown Austin stretched out below, bright and indifferent. 48 hours, Nathan. If Zenith walks, we lose everything. No one in that room argued. No one offered a new theory. They just sat there, 20 brilliant people, paralyzed by a problem none of them could solve. Now let me take you 14 floors down and 30 years into a different life. Grace Bennett started her shift at 5:30 that morning, the same way she had started every shift for the past 16 years. She parked her 12-year-old Honda Civic in the employee lot, walked through the service entrance, changed into her navy blue uniform in the utility closet on the ground floor, and filled her cart with supplies. Glass cleaner, floor polish, trash bags, paper towels. Grace was 44 years old. She had raised Chloe alone since her husband, a construction engineer named James Bennett, died in a scaffolding accident when Chloe was 4. James had graduated top of his class, but never received his professional license. The review board said his application was incomplete. His professors said his skin was the wrong color. Grace never talked about it. She just went to work. She had been cleaning the offices of Meridian Systems since before the building had a second floor. She knew which executives liked their desks wiped with lavender spray and which ones wanted nothing touched. She knew the lobby orchids needed exactly 6 ice cubes on Tuesdays and Fridays. She knew the name of every security guard, every receptionist, every night janitor. Almost no one in the building knew hers. She earned $14 an hour. No benefits, no sick days. Her hands were rough and cracked from years of cleaning chemicals, and she covered them with lotion every night before bed so her daughter wouldn't notice. Grace had a philosophy about work. She never said it out loud, but she lived it. You do the job, you do it well, and you don't let anyone make you feel small for doing it. That afternoon, at 4:15, her daughter walked through the front doors of Meridian Systems. Chloe Bennett had taken the number 12 bus from Austin East High School, a 45-minute ride that included 2 transfers and a 3-block walk. She was wearing her school uniform, a navy polo shirt with a small coffee stain near the collar, khaki pants that were slightly too short because she'd grown 2 inches since September, and sneakers with the left sole starting to separate. Her backpack was the same one she'd had since 8th grade. She carried a brown paper bag with her mother's lunch inside, rice, beans, and a piece of chicken from last night's dinner, because Grace had forgotten it on the kitchen counter that morning. Chloe checked in at the front desk, got a visitor badge, and headed for the elevator. She was supposed to go to the 12th floor, where the maintenance staff had a small break room. She pressed 12. The elevator stopped on 38. The doors opened to chaos. Engineers were moving between workstations with the frantic energy of people who knew their jobs depended on the next 24 hours. Screens glowed red. Voices overlapped. Someone was on the phone saying, "No, tell them we need more time. Tell them anything." And in the center of it all stood Grant Whitmore. Chloe stepped out of the elevator by instinct, the way you might step out of a car to look at an accident. She didn't mean to be there. She didn't belong there. And Grant Whitmore made sure she knew it. He spotted her within 3 seconds. A black girl, school uniform, brown paper bag, standing in the middle of his 38th floor war room like she'd wandered into the wrong country. "Who let this kid up here?" His voice cut through the noise like a blade. Every head turned. Chloe opened her mouth to explain. She got 2 words out. This floor is restricted to authorized personnel, and I can always tell who doesn't belong." He looked her up and down, not quickly, slowly, the way someone examines a stain on an expensive carpet. "Is this the maid's daughter? Is that what this is?" Silence. 20 people. Not one correction. "Your mother scrubs floors, sweetheart. That's her ceiling, and apparently it's yours too." He pointed at Phil Dawson, the security guard who had just stepped off the elevator behind Chloe. "Get her out, now, before she touches something worth more than her mother makes in a year." Phil Dawson was 55, a quiet man with grown children of his own. He had a granddaughter about Chloe's age. He put his hand gently on Chloe's shoulder and walked her back to the elevator. His jaw was tight. His eyes stayed on the floor. He didn't agree with what just happened. Everything about his posture said so. But he didn't say a word. None of them did. In the conference room, someone snickered. Nathan Carver stared at his keyboard. The elevator doors closed. Chloe stood inside, alone, holding her mother's lunch. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. She was 16 years old, and she had just been humiliated by the most powerful man in a building where her mother had scrubbed toilets for 16 years. She found Grace on the 12th floor, mopping the break room. Grace saw her daughter's face and stopped. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. She set the mop against the wall, pulled Chloe into her arms, and held her for a long time. "Some people only see the uniform, baby," Grace whispered. "Don't ever let them see your tears. That's what they want." Chloe pulled back. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But her face had changed. She wasn't crying anymore. She was thinking. Because in those few seconds on the 38th floor, before Grant Whitmore opened his mouth, before Phil Dawson walked her to the elevator, before anyone even noticed she was there, Chloe had looked at the screens, the error logs, the cascading red alerts scrolling across 3 monitors. 3 seconds. That's all it took. The pattern in the error logs, the cascading failure sequence, the way the memory spikes lined up with the encryption calls. She had seen this exact pattern before. She had written the code that was supposed to prevent it, and she knew exactly what was wrong. If you think this girl is going to walk away quietly, you don't know this story. Subscribe now, because what happens next changed everything. The laptop was a Dell Latitude, cracked screen, missing 3 keys on the left side of the keyboard. Battery that held a charge for about 2 hours on a good day. Grace found it sitting on top of the recycling bin outside the 38th floor server room on a Wednesday night, 5 years before any of this happened. Someone had peeled off the asset sticker. Someone had decided it wasn't worth keeping. Grace brought it home because her 11-year-old daughter needed something to type her school reports on. Chloe plugged it in, opened the lid, and saw something she had never seen before. A terminal window, still open from the last user. Green text on a black screen. A blinking cursor waiting for instructions. She typed the word hello and pressed enter. The terminal didn't understand, but Chloe wanted it to. That night, she walked 6 blocks to the public library, sat at a shared computer, and searched how to talk to a computer. The first result was a free Python tutorial. She stayed until the library closed at 9. The librarian had to tap her shoulder twice. Grace found her sitting on the front steps, scribbling notes on the back of a grocery receipt. She went back the next day, and the day after that. For 2 months, Chloe split her time between school, the library, and the cracked Dell in her bedroom. Grace started picking up double shifts at Meridian to pay for a home internet connection, so her daughter would stop walking 6 blocks in the dark. By 12, Chloe was writing scripts that automated her homework. By 13, she found a bug in her school's attendance system that was marking present students absent. She fixed it and emailed the principal a 3-paragraph explanation. The principal never responded. But the bug disappeared. By 14, Chloe was writing code that strangers on the internet called elegant. She contributed to open source projects under a username she chose carefully. Spectra. No photo, no bio, no age, no gender, no race. Just code. Clean, fast, and brilliant. At 15, she released CipherWeave. CipherWeave was an open source encryption framework. It handled secure data transmission 6 times faster than the industry standard. Within 3 months, it was downloaded over 80,000 times. Within 8 months, more than 2,000 companies had integrated it into their systems: banks, hospitals, cloud providers, and Meridian Systems, who built their entire Nexus platform on top of it. Nobody knew who Spectra was. Tech journalists wrote profiles, Reddit threads turned into conspiracy theories. 3 venture capital firms posted open offers. A recruiter at Meridian Systems, ironically enough, wrote a blog post calling Spectra the most important anonymous contributor to encryption technology in the last decade. Spectra was a 15-year-old girl sitting cross-legged on the floor of a 400-square-foot apartment, coding on a cracked Dell laptop while her mother worked the night shift cleaning offices. Grace worked 60-hour weeks, so Chloe could stay up coding until midnight. She didn't understand a single line on that screen, and she didn't pretend to. But she understood the look on her daughter's face when those fingers started moving. It was the same look her husband used to have when he bent over blueprints at the kitchen table. James Bennett had been a construction engineer, graduated top of his class, smart enough to design buildings, too black to get the license that let him sign off on them. He died on a scaffolding collapse when Chloe was 4, building a structure someone else would take credit for. Grace kept one thing from James, a yellow sticky note on the refrigerator, written in his block handwriting. It said, "They can ignore the messenger. They can't ignore the message." Chloe peeled that note off the fridge when she was 12 and stuck it to the inside of her laptop lid. It was still there the day she walked into Meridian Systems. She never told her mother what she did online, not because she was hiding it, because she wasn't sure it mattered. Chloe was used to being invisible. At school, she was the quiet kid in the back row. At the apartment complex, she was the girl who never came outside. On the internet, she was a ghost named Spectra, who moved through code the way water moves through pipes, silently, without effort, and absolutely everywhere. But that afternoon, standing in the 12th floor break room with her mother's arms around her, something shifted. The man on the 38th floor had looked at her and seen nothing, less than nothing. He had seen a stain on his expensive carpet. And for the first time in her life, Chloe didn't want to be invisible anymore. She wanted to be undeniable. Chloe sat on the break room floor with her back against the vending machine. Grace stood over her, arms folded, shaking her head before her daughter even opened her mouth. "Mom, I know what's wrong with their system." "No, I can fix it." "Chloe Marie Bennett, absolutely not. We are not going back up there. That man already—" Grace stopped herself. She pressed her lips together. "We can't afford that kind of trouble. Not here. Not at my job." "Mom." Chloe looked up. She didn't raise her voice. She never did. "You've cleaned their floors for 16 years. You've cleaned their bathrooms and emptied their trash and scrubbed their coffee stains, and not one of them has ever asked your name. Not once in 16 years." She paused. "And then that man stood in front of 20 people and called you a ceiling." Grace didn't move. "I'm not going up there for me," Chloe said quietly. "I'm going up there because someone in this family needs to stand in that room and not be invisible." Grace looked at her daughter. She saw the jaw, she saw the eyes, she saw James. The same stubborn, quiet fire that no amount of logic could put out. She had seen that look exactly, twice before. Once when James told her he was going to reapply for his license, and once when Chloe told her she was going to learn to code. Both times she knew arguing was useless. Grace reached out and straightened the collar of Chloe's school uniform, the small coffee stain near the neck. She rubbed it gently with her thumb, even though it wouldn't come out. 2 minutes, Grace said, and if that man says one more word about you, I'm going up there myself. Chloe stood up. She kissed her mother on the cheek, and she walked toward the elevator. The ride from 12 to 38 took 19 seconds. Chloe counted every one of them. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips. The brown paper bag was still in her left hand. She set it down on the elevator floor. She wouldn't need it. The doors opened. Phil Dawson was standing right there, as if he'd been waiting. He looked at Chloe and his face fell. "Kid, you can't be up here." "I know what's wrong with their system, sir. The encryption module has a memory leak that compounds with every concurrent request. It's not a hardware failure. It's a logic error in the allocation loop. I can fix it in under 2 minutes." Phil blinked. He was a security guard, not an engineer. He didn't understand half of what she just said. But he understood the way she said it. No hesitation, no pleading, just facts, delivered with the kind of certainty that doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from knowing. He stepped aside. Chloe walked down the hallway. Her sneakers squeaked on the polished floor. Every step echoed. The engineering bullpen was directly ahead, glass walls on 3 sides, and she could see them all inside. 20 engineers hunched over screens, Nathan Carver pacing, and Grant Whitmore standing at the head of the table, phone pressed to his ear, telling someone that the situation was under control. It was not under control. Chloe pushed open the glass door. The air inside smelled like cold coffee, sweat, and the particular desperation of people who have been failing for 3 days straight. A whiteboard on the far wall was covered in diagrams, crossed-out theories, and question marks. Takeout containers were stacked on a side table. Someone's jacket was balled up on the floor, like they had tried to sleep under their desk. Every head in the room turned. Grant lowered his phone. For a moment, his face went blank, like he was trying to process how this same girl, this same school uniform, this same brown skin, was standing in his conference room again. Then the anger came. "Are you serious right now? I told security to..." "Your Nexus platform crashes every time it processes concurrent encryption requests above your threshold limit." Chloe's voice was steady, not loud, not aggressive, just clear. "The memory leak is in the CipherWeave integration layer. Every thread allocates memory for the encryption handshake, but never releases it. At 12,000 simultaneous connections, your system runs out of resources and collapses. Your team has been looking at the hardware. The problem is in the code." The room went still. Nathan Carver turned slowly from his monitor. His mouth was slightly open. He had been chasing the encryption module theory for 2 days, but couldn't pinpoint the mechanism. This girl had just described it in 4 sentences. Grant stared at her. Then he laughed. Not a warm laugh, a sharp, disbelieving bark that bounced off the glass walls. "You expect me to believe that a child, in a school uniform can diagnose what my entire department couldn't?" Silence. Then a voice from the far end of the table. Eleanor Price, Meridian's chief technology officer. She had been sitting quietly for most of the crisis, watching her engineers spin in circles, saying very little. She was 45, silver-haired, and had a reputation for being the only person in the building that Grant Whitmore couldn't intimidate. "Grant." Eleanor didn't raise her voice. "We've been at this for 72 hours. We have less than 48 left. We have tried everything your 20 engineers have suggested. Every single thing." She looked at Chloe, then back at Grant. "What exactly do we have to lose?" The room waited. Grant's jaw worked. He looked at Chloe the way a man looks at a parking ticket. Something annoying. Something beneath him. Something he would deal with and forget. "Fine," he waved his hand. "Let the janitor's kid have her for 2 minutes, and when she fails, Phil escorts her out of this building permanently." He leaned forward. "And I want her mother's employment to be reviewed by the end of the week." He said it loud enough for Chloe to hear. He wanted her to hear it. He wanted it to sting. He wanted her to flinch, to cry, to prove that she was exactly the kind of fragile, out-of-place thing he believed her to be. Chloe didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She looked at Grant Whitmore with the calm, level gaze of someone who had already done the math and knew the answer. Eleanor stood up. She walked over to Chloe and gestured toward Nathan's workstation. "Sit down." Chloe sat. Nathan Carver reached across the desk and placed a small digital timer in front of her. He pressed start. The numbers began climbing. Through the glass wall of the conference room, 14 floors below, Grace Bennett stood in the hallway outside the service elevator. She couldn't see the 38th floor from where she stood. She couldn't hear anything. She just pressed her palms together, closed her eyes, and waited. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She was praying, or counting, or both. On the 38th floor, Chloe Bennett placed her fingers on the keyboard. The timer read 5 seconds. She started typing. The first thing Chloe did was close every window on the screen except the terminal. Nathan Carver had 6 monitoring dashboards open, 2 diagnostic tools, and a debugging suite that was itself consuming system resources. Chloe swept them all aside, like clearing dishes off a table. She opened a single command line interface and began navigating through the file structure of the Meridian Nexus platform. Her fingers didn't hesitate, not once. She moved through the directories the way someone moves through their own house in the dark. No searching, no second guessing, just certainty born from a kind of familiarity that shouldn't have been possible for someone who had never worked at Meridian Systems. She navigated past the front-end layers without a glance. She skipped the database modules entirely. She went straight for the encryption core, the deepest, most complex layer of the entire Nexus architecture, as if she had built the hallway herself and knew exactly which door to open. 20 engineers stood behind her in a loose semicircle. Some leaned forward. Some crossed their arms. One of them, a junior developer near the window, was recording on his phone. Nobody told him to stop, because nobody was thinking about anything except the girl at the keyboard. Nathan Carver leaned over to Eleanor Price and whispered, "How does she know the file structure?" Eleanor didn't answer. She was watching Chloe's hands, the way her fingers moved, fast but unhurried, confident but not careless. Eleanor had managed engineering teams for 20 years. She had seen talent. She had seen brilliance. She had never seen hands that moved like that on a first encounter with an unfamiliar system. Except these hands didn't look unfamiliar with the system at all. 30 seconds in, Chloe stopped. Her cursor blinked on a file deep inside the encryption module, a function called concurrent handshake that managed the memory allocation for every encrypted connection request. She scrolled through the code. Then she pointed at the screen. "Here." Her voice was quiet but carried across the silent room. "This function creates a new memory block every time a client initiates an encrypted session. But look at the release call." She scrolled down 3 lines. "It's inside a conditional statement that only triggers when the session ends normally. If the session times out, or if the server closes it on its end, the memory block stays allocated. It never gets released." She let that sink in for a moment. When you're running under normal load, it doesn't matter. The unreleased blocks are small, and the system reclaims them during scheduled maintenance windows. But when you hit 12,000 concurrent connections, like you did during the Zenith stress test, the orphaned blocks stack faster than the system can cycle them. Memory usage spikes, the garbage collector can't keep up, and the whole platform collapses under its own weight. Nathan Carver pulled up the memory usage logs from the day of the crash. He stared at them. Then he stared at Chloe. The spike pattern matched her explanation perfectly. 12,000 connections, memory climbing in a straight, relentless line. No release, no plateau. Just a wall of allocation that ended in total system failure. "She's right," he said. He wasn't whispering anymore. "That's exactly what happened. That's exactly what we've been looking for." Grant Whitmore stood at the back of the room with his arms crossed. His face was unreadable, but his fingers were pressing into his own biceps, hard enough to leave marks. He couldn't admit it, not out loud. Not to a room full of people watching a child do what his entire payroll couldn't. So he said the only thing left. Finding the problem isn't fixing the problem. We've found problems before. We need it running. Clock's ticking. Chloe didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She was already typing. What happened over the next 60 seconds would later be described by Nathan Carver in an interview as the most remarkable display of live coding I have ever witnessed. He said it without exaggeration. He said it with the tone of a man who had watched something that changed the way he understood his own profession. Chloe didn't just patch the bug. She didn't slap a bandage on the release call and move on. She rewrote the entire memory management architecture for the encryption module. Every line she typed was clean, efficient, and purposeful. She introduced a pooling system that pre-allocated memory blocks and recycled them across sessions, eliminating the leak entirely while reducing the overall memory footprint by more than half. She added a failsafe, a secondary monitor that would trigger an automatic flush if unreleased blocks exceeded a threshold. And she did all of this while keeping the existing encryption logic intact. She didn't reference any documentation. She didn't open a browser. She didn't ask a single question. At 85 seconds, she lifted her hands from the keyboard, placed them flat on the desk, exhaled once. Done. Run it. 2 words, spoken with the same weight as a surgeon saying, close. Nathan Carver hesitated. He looked at Eleanor. His expression said what his mouth wouldn't. What if it doesn't work? What if it makes it worse? Eleanor held his gaze and nodded once. Do it. Nathan initiated a full system restart. The room was completely silent. 20 people stood in a semicircle around a workstation occupied by a girl whose backpack was sitting on the floor next to her left foot, still zipped, still holding her school binder and a half-eaten pack of crackers. The first node came online. Green. Second node. Green. Third. Fourth. Fifth. All green. Then the rest. One by one, the monitoring dashboard filled with green status indicators, like lights coming on across a city after a blackout. 10 nodes. 20. 50. All green. All stable. All alive. Nathan ran the benchmark suite. Processing speed, 312% faster than the pre-crash baseline. Memory stability, flat. No leaks, no spikes, no orphaned blocks. Someone in the back of the room said very quietly, "That's not possible." Nathan ran the benchmark again. Same result. He turned to Eleanor. His voice cracked slightly. "It's not just fixed. It's better than it was before the crash. Significantly better." A few engineers started clapping, then more. Nathan Carver sat down heavily in his chair and put his face in his hands. Not because he was sad, because he was overwhelmed. Because the thing that had been destroying him for 3 days had just been erased in 90 seconds by a child sitting in his chair. Grant Whitmore hadn't moved. His arms were still crossed, but his jaw was tight, and the color in his face had shifted from confident authority to something he had never worn before: uncertainty. He looked like a man who had just watched his own house get rebuilt by someone he had tried to evict from the property. And then came the third revelation, the one that broke the room. Eleanor Price had been watching Chloe throughout the entire process. Not the results, not the dashboard. Chloe, her posture, her rhythm, the way she structured her code, the variable names, the compression logic, the way she nested functions with a minimalist elegance that was almost like a signature. Eleanor had studied CipherWeave's source code for months. She had written internal memos about Spectra's unique coding philosophy. She knew that style the way a music professor knows a composer's fingerprint. And she was looking at it right now, on a workstation in her own building. Written by a 16-year-old girl. She walked slowly to the workstation. She opened her own laptop. She pulled up a repository, the CipherWeave source code, the open-source encryption framework that Meridian Nexus was built on. The framework that had been released 2 years ago by an anonymous developer known only as Spectra. She placed her laptop next to the workstation monitor, side by side. The naming conventions matched. The structural logic matched. The compression philosophy matched. It wasn't similar. It was identical. Eleanor looked at Chloe. "You're Spectra." It wasn't a question. Chloe met her eyes, She didn't look proud. She didn't look defiant. She looked like someone who had kept a secret for a very long time and was tired of carrying it. She nodded. Once. Barely a movement. But it landed in that room like a thunderclap. The room didn't gasp. It didn't erupt. It just stopped. Time stopped. Sound stopped. 20 people stood frozen in the blue glow of their screens, staring at a 16-year-old girl in a school uniform. And the realization settled over them like cold water. The framework their entire platform was built on. The code that processed their clients' data, secured their transactions, protected their $700 million contract. It was written by the daughter of the woman who mopped their floors. Nathan Carver spoke first. His voice was barely above a whisper. The $5 million bounty. The recruiting search. The blog post I wrote calling Spectra the most important contributor to encryption technology in a decade. He paused. He looked at the cracked backpack on the floor, at the school uniform, at the sneakers with the separating sole. It was her. This whole time. It was always her. Grant Whitmore stood at the back of the room, arms slowly falling to his sides. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time in his career, he had absolutely nothing to say. The silence lasted about 10 seconds. It felt like a year. Grant Whitmore was the first to move. He straightened his tie. He adjusted his cuffs. He did the things powerful men do when they need a moment to rearrange their face before the world sees what's underneath. Then he walked forward, past the engineers, past Nathan Carver, past Eleanor Price, and stopped directly in front of Chloe Bennett. When he spoke, his voice had changed completely. The sharpness was gone. The contempt was gone. In its place was something smooth and warm and carefully manufactured. The voice of a man who had spent decades learning how to make people feel special when he needed something from them. Chloe. He used her name for the first time. Miss Bennett, I think we clearly got off on the wrong foot earlier. That was a misunderstanding, and I take full responsibility for it. He paused, letting the apology land like a gift. What you just demonstrated is nothing short of extraordinary. Generational talent. The kind of mind that comes along once in a decade. He clasped his hands together. Let's talk about your future, right here, right now. I want to offer you a position at Meridian Systems, full compensation package, equity stake. You would be the youngest hire in company history. We'll work around your school schedule. We'll provide tutors if you need them, whatever it takes. He spread his hands. Name your price. Then he turned toward the glass wall of the conference room, where Grace Bennett was now standing in the hallway. She had come up. She couldn't stay downstairs any longer. She stood there in her navy blue uniform, her hands still damp from the cleaning solution she had been using 15 minutes earlier, her eyes wet, watching her daughter through the glass. Mrs. Bennett, Grant's voice carried through the open door. Your daughter is remarkable, truly remarkable. We would be honored to have her as part of the Meridian family. Grace didn't respond. She just looked at Chloe. Chloe sat at the workstation. She looked at Grant. She looked at the screen, still glowing green with the system she had just saved. She looked at Eleanor Price, who was watching her with an expression that might have been respect or might have been something closer to recognition. Then she looked at her mother through the glass. Grace's hands were folded in front of her. Her knuckles were white. She gave the smallest nod. Whatever you decide, baby, I'm right here. Chloe reached down to her backpack, unzipped the front pocket, pulled out her phone, a prepaid model with a cracked screen protector that matched her laptop. She opened her email, scrolled to a message she had read 43 times in the past week. She turned the screen toward Grant Whitmore. The email was from Harrison Cole, Vice President of Engineering at Titan Dynamics. The subject line read, "Welcome home, Spectra." The body was short. Chloe let Grant read it. Every word. Dear Spectra, we have known who you are for 6 months. We chose to wait until you were ready. Enclosed is our formal offer. Full scholarship to MIT, sponsored by Titan Dynamics. A research fellow position, the youngest in our company's history. A seat at our table that has been waiting for you since the day you published Cypherweave. We did not need to humiliate anyone to recognize your worth. We just needed to pay attention. Grant read it. Then he read it again. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Chloe pulled the phone back. She looked directly at Grant Whitmore, not with anger, not with triumph, with something quieter and more devastating than either. You told me that people like me don't belong here, she said. You were right. I don't belong here. I belong somewhere that knew my name before they needed my hands. She stood up, pushed the chair back gently, picked up her backpack and slung it over one shoulder. Grace stepped through the doorway. For the first time in 16 years, she walked into a room on the 38th floor, not to clean it, not to empty the trash or wipe down the table. She walked in because her daughter was there, and she was done being invisible too. She placed her hand on Chloe's shoulder, said nothing, didn't need to. The weight of her palm said everything. I see you. I'm proud of you. Let's go home. They walked out together, past 20 engineers, past Nathan Carver, who stood and watched them go with something broken behind his eyes. Past Grant Whitmore, who stood perfectly still, holding nothing. The elevator doors closed. If you were Chloe, would you have taken the money, or would you have walked away? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story hit you the way it hit me, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe, because this channel finds stories like this every single week. The conference room emptied slowly after Chloe and Grace left. Engineers drifted back to their desks in silence. Nobody celebrated. Nobody high-fived. The system was back online. The $700 million contract was saved, and not a single person in that building felt like they had won anything. Eleanor Price was the first to speak to Grant directly. She found him standing by the window, staring at the Austin skyline, his hands flat against the glass. She didn't sit down. She didn't soften her voice. You just let the most valuable person in this building walk out the front door, she said. And you did it because you couldn't see past her mother's uniform. She paused. I've been your CTO for 8 years, Grant. I've defended decisions I didn't agree with. I've stayed quiet when I should have spoken. But I watched you humiliate a child today. A child who turned out to be the person we've been searching for, spending millions of dollars trying to recruit for 2 years. Eleanor set a single sheet of paper on the windowsill next to him. That's my resignation, effective immediately. Grant didn't pick it up. He didn't turn around. Nathan Carver sat at his desk long after everyone else had gone, staring at the workstation where Chloe had sat. The timer still read 91 seconds. He remembered what he had done when Grant humiliated her. He had looked at his keyboard. He had said nothing. Nathan submitted his resignation the next morning. In the subject line, he wrote 3 words. I looked away. On the bus home, Chloe sat next to her mother in the back row. Grace held her daughter's hand for the entire ride. Neither spoke. Chloe's phone buzzed. A call from a number she didn't recognize. She answered. Chloe, this is Harrison Cole. I heard what happened today. All of it. His voice was steady and kind. I want you to know that we meant every word of that email. You have a home with us whenever you're ready. He paused. Welcome to the team, Spectra. Chloe closed her eyes. Grace squeezed her hand. Outside the bus window, the Meridian Systems building disappeared behind them, shrinking into the skyline like something that no longer mattered. The video surfaced 3 days later. Nobody knows exactly who released it. Internal investigations pointed to the security office, but Phil Dawson had already resigned by then. What mattered was the footage itself. 4 minutes and 12 seconds of crystal-clear security camera recording from the 38th floor. Grant Whitmore, CEO of a billion-dollar company, standing in front of 20 employees, publicly humiliating a 16-year-old girl in a school uniform, calling her mother a ceiling, ordering security to remove a child from the building, laughing. The internet did what the internet does. Within 24 hours, the video had 9 million views. Within 48, it was on every major news outlet in the country. The hashtag #SheSaidSpectra trended globally for 6 consecutive days. Tech journalists who had spent years wondering about the identity of the mysterious coder behind Cypherweave now had their answer. And the story was bigger than anyone had imagined. A 16-year-old black girl, raised by a cleaning lady, self-taught on a discarded laptop, built a framework used by thousands of companies, then walked into one of those companies to bring her mother lunch and was told she didn't belong. The backlash was immediate and severe. Zenith Corporation, whose $700 million contract had been saved by Chloe's 90-second fix, issued a public statement. They called the video deeply disturbing and announced they were reassessing their long-term partnership with Meridian Systems. 3 other major clients followed within a week. Meridian's stock price dropped 18% in 10 days. Victoria Steele, chairwoman of Meridian's board of directors, convened an emergency meeting. She was 60 years old, had built her career on corporate governance, and had zero tolerance for executives who became liabilities. The board watched the full security footage in silence. Then they voted. It was unanimous. Grant Whitmore was given 90 days to transition out of the CEO role. His severance package was reduced by 60% under the company's ethics violation clause. No farewell party, no press conference, no golden parachute. 3 months later, Grant Whitmore left Meridian Systems through a side door on a Tuesday morning. No photographers, no former colleagues were waiting to shake his hand. He accepted a consulting position at a small logistics firm in suburban Dallas, 2nd floor, shared office, no view. The kind of job he would have laughed at 5 years earlier. The same week Grant cleaned out his desk, Titan Dynamics made 2 announcements. The first was the Grace Bennett Scholarship Fund, a fully endowed program providing STEM scholarships to children of service workers and low-income families across Texas. The fund was named after a woman who had spent 16 years cleaning offices and never once been asked her name. Grace was invited to the launch event as a guest of honor. She wore a new dress. She cried during the speech. She didn't try to hide it. The second announcement was quieter, a press release on Titan's corporate blog. It said simply that Titan Dynamics had acquired exclusive advisory rights from the developer known as Spectra, and that Spectra would be contributing to Titan's next-generation encryption platform while completing her education. The tech world read that sentence and understood exactly what it meant. Grant Whitmore hadn't just lost a prodigy. He had handed his biggest competitor the most gifted young mind in the industry. Not because Titan was smarter, not because they offered more money, because they had treated a 16-year-old girl like a human being. That's all it took. Basic decency, the kind that costs nothing and is apparently worth $700 million. 6 months later, Chloe Bennett walked through the gates of MIT, 16 years old, full scholarship. She carried a new backpack and an old laptop, the same cracked Dell from a recycling bin. Her father's note was still taped inside. Grace watched from a new apartment in Austin. For the first time in 20 years, her hands were soft. If it were you, 16, watching your mom get ignored for 16 years, would you have walked back into that room? Tell me in the comments. Go back to the moment she sat down at that keyboard. She never hesitated, not once. Subscribe. We find these stories so you never forget they're out there.
Chloe looked at the richest man in the room and said, I belonged somewhere that knew my name before they needed my hands. Then she walked out the front door, not the service and chains, the front door. And here's the part that won't let me alone. Brent didn't lose Chloe because she wasn't good enough. He lost her because he couldn't imagine that brilliance could live inside the school uniform and scuffed sneakers. And when he finally saw it, 90 seconds too late, he tried to buy it like it was something on the shelf and he walked past and suddenly wanted. But that's not how people work. You can't humiliate someone then offer them a chair at the table and you realize you need them. Titan didn't offer Chloe more money. They offered her something Brent never could. They saw her first, and that's what she chose, not the bigger check, the earlier eyes. So I want to ask you, are you only kind to people after you find out what they're worth, or before? There's a differences. And the people on the receiving end always know which one it is. Tell me in the comments. If this hits you, like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell. We tell the stories every week. Excellence doesn't ask permission. And it never needed yours. Remember that.